Bam, 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 Foxy. That was me doing Garth, doing Jimi Hendrix's Foxy Lady. Um, Perhaps the first successful commercialized funk rock song. Noticed emphasis on the downbeat. Bam, bam, bam. That's what funk's all about. How did funk occur? Well, I mean, it came by the 60s. There was Memphis Stew and other unmistakable funk rhythms. The godfather of funk, James Brown, took those on and kind of established funk as a type of music. The only step that was left really which happened in kind of mid to late 60s, was to just play it with more power, more aggression, and Hendrix did that, and many other people did that too. I mean, you look at Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, and Curtis Mayfield. Massive. Forerunners of funk rock, and there was a lot of crossover, because they came from very similar places. Funk and soul came from very similar scenes, very similar cultures. So there was a lot of crossover. All the artists that I've just mentioned had, unmistakable funk rock songs, unmistakable soul songs, and mixing and matching. And all artists are crossover of some kind. And then it was kind of, I mean, funk rock. You probably think of, I mean, it's definitely one of definitely a really black and white scene. I mean, not all of these scenes, glam, metal, prog. A lot of these scenes are mainly white dominated, Caucasian artists, but obviously lots of back and forth and lots of influences taken from Afro-American culture as well. But it kind of moved on from the Afro-American artists quite quickly. As I also mentioned, Allman Brothers, bands like that, and then Steely Dan. I mentioned them because they were both, heavy soul rock musicians and also really funk rock musicians. So lots of crossover. Even Pink Floyd, ELO, even prog rock bands like that definitely had funk rock songs. I mean, Pink Floyd, based a lot of the 70s sounds on which is really, it's a funk rhythm. I'm just, mentioning the influences and the dabblers, I'd say Toto in the mid-70s came around, and when they did, I imagine that the scene was really well established. You already had pop funk, and people like the Bee Gees and Sister Sledge taking funk to pop levels, but then Toto really kind of had lots of these Afro-American influences, and really, pushed the funk rock boundaries. They were also fabulous musicians, and the production was, just very meticulous, beautiful sounds, and delved into pop, and they had some huge hits as well, Africa, and for example, and maybe even prog rock moments, soul moments. But yeah, I think calling them like one of the first unequivocal funk rock bands, I think is probably quite accurate. The next leap would be the Red Hot Chili Peppers. So California band, LA, and kind of left still really a lot of Afro-American influences, but left the soul. Maybe later in their career, maybe in the 90s, you could argue that soul kind of came, maybe they brought some more soul into the, like Blood Sugar Sex Magik definitely had some moments of like some heart-wrenching moments under the bridge. But, you know, they started in the early 80s and they weren't serious, you know, they were all about fun and drawing in from hip hop and scenes like that were very new at the time. Lots of rapping and shouting and horns and you know lots of fun and craziness. Maybe even the best the best example of a funk rock band. You know, the archetypal funk rock band. And then in the 90s they got a bit arty and a bit poppy and kind of went their own way. But you know, I think they'll always be remembered for establishing funk rock. Other kind of paths of funk rock would be, I'd say, I've mentioned King Crimson as like important kind of influences in metal and prog rock and stuff, but also funk rock and also funk metal. This becomes a thing in the 80s as well. Funk metal kind of completely leaves the soul, really. The rhythms are similar, but it's taken from the 70s metal scenes and metal chord sequences rather than the kind of warmer soul. You know, metal is kind of cold, isn't it? So it's a colder scene and so less of the warmer melody that kind of funk rock took from soul. So then you get funk metal, and it's kind of colder. And Bad Brains, good example. I mean, they started as kind of a noise hardcore punk band, and then in the 80s, kind of helped us establish funk metal, really. Faith No More, you know, maybe the funk metal band. After parting ways with their lead singer Chuck Mosley, they got on board Mike Patton and then just took funk metal to new heights. Massively successful, massively influential throughout metal and even pop. Through the decades to come, Mike Patton, the second Faith No More lead singer, had come from a band called Mr. Bungle, who I have mentioned as like a massive prog, you know, keeping the prog rock flag held high through the 80s. But they could also be called as well as a prog rock band. I mean, that's the thing about prog rock bands, you know, they touch on everything. And, you know, a good prog rock band, you know, just really does touch on as much as possible. And, you know, they could be called a funk rock band or a funk metal band or even like a horror ska band. I've heard that called I've heard that name used for them, and that's actually pretty accurate. You know, you listen to some songs and horror ska is pretty much bang on, but other songs, you know, they have moments, you know, lots of kind of jazz moments, and they knew their stuff, they knew jazz, they knew like bossa nova and everything, and they could do it all. And anyway, so that's funk metal. Carrying on, just finishing that path. I'd say Living Colour, worth mentioning. another kind of mixed race, lots of black and white racially, as well as influentially, helped establish the funk metal scene. And then interestingly, just to show, their roots and the whole origin of it all, that perhaps Living Colour's greatest moment, and one of the greatest moments in rock pop history for me, was the massive crossover single Love Rears Its Ugly Head, released in 1990, which was just so soul wrenching. I mean, it was just soul. I mean, you can hear like the funk rhythm. It's an old, funk soul rhythm style, but modernized, beautiful song. One of my favorites, and really helped kind of push, because obviously you got like a bunch of mainly Caucasian funk metal fans buying their new single, and then there's then listening to something entirely different. They're listening to, in 5 minutes, a history of 40 years of music. A great moment. And then Rage Against the Machine would be the great 90s funk metal example, heavily political. Funk does have a history of kind of political activity. Curtis Mayfield, really famous for this, and Marvin Gaye, some of his lyrics, and then Rage Against the Machine, massively politically involved and politically progressive. Again, really mixed race, really mixing the races. That's, maybe more than any other scene, funk has just really solidified the union between black Africans and Caucasians. I mean, in Rage Against the Machine, you have there's Mexican blood and Afro blood and Caucasian blood. Is real kind of racial unity there. So going back to funk rock, because it kind of it kind of deviated, and kind of you get the Chili's taking to funk rock path, and then you got kind of Faith No More taking the funk metal path, and a couple more bands to mention for the funk rock scene. I guess important would be Jane's Addiction and Smashing Pumpkins. Both those bands, you can really hear, like in the early records, the strong funk rock power. Funnily enough, both drummers of both those bands, Stephen Perkins and Jimmy Chamberlin, both jazz trained, and funk trained, so they were just, two of the greatest drummers in modern rock history. And so you can hear really where where funk rock was then taken with those two bands. And I think that's about it.